It's my great pleasure to be speaking to writer-director Marcus Markou, whose film The Wife and Her House Husband is screening as part of the British International Film Festival, part of Palace Cinemas. And Marcus, welcome to Australia.
Well, thank you for having me, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to talk to you. And I know this is your second feature and you are very much into self-funding and so on. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm quite intrigued. What was the inspiration behind writing and, of course, directing The Wife and Her House Husband?
Well, it was really I was contributing financially to a bigger film project. And that collapsed during COVID, like a lot of projects collapsed during COVID. And I was left with a lump sum of money, and you're never supposed to do this as a writer. You're supposed to write the full screenplay, then attach the talent, then find the money, then make the film. But in this case, I wrote a screenplay specifically around a micro budget. And that meant I had these incredible constraints. I thought, well, I wanted the best crew I could find. I wanted a really good camera team and the sound recorders. I wanted a production designer, wardrobe. But I realized that the big sort of variable costs in filmmaking are things like talent and locations, and also the page count, for example. Like every page is a huge amount of money. And I realized I only had enough budget for a 60-page script. And therefore, a two-hander, a couple, a conversation between two people. I mean, you look at films like My Dinner with Andre or Scenes from a Marriage, they're quite economically constrained, because when you only have two, really, there were the odd sort of secondary characters pop in the movie, but really when you've only got two actors in a scene, there's such an easy thing to cover. Sometimes you can get the entire conversation that you need as a master shot, and you don't even have to go in for close-up. So in terms of so really it was about economics, Peter. I thought I can only shoot 60 pages. And the gamble was, will 60 pages run to a full-length feature film, or will I lose a couple of scenes and end up with a 40-minute film? So you should never go into filmmaking this way, but somehow the constraints of the film economically allowed me to shoot handheld, off the shoulder. We used just one lens, because I realized every time you change a lens, you're taking up time. So all of these things that were kind of economically led really fed into the creative spirit of the film, which aligned with the story. And sometimes that is a serendipity that just works in your favor as a filmmaker. And it did for us on this.
Well, it certainly did work, because I really enjoyed this film, even especially this couple who are splitting up and trying to work through that, especially through a particular letter or background or so on that they're trying to fulfill. So I like the plotting of the film. Can you talk about the way you plotted it?
You're very smart to pick up on that, Peter, because a conversation between two people is not dramatically interesting. It's really not. And I had to find a device in the story that would pull them through. And you're correct to point out about the letter. And so when I was thinking about how can I have where's the conflict going to come from when you've only got two characters in a scene? Where's the conflict going to come from? Where's that? And without having a third character, let's say. The letter was the device, because the letter effectively is a list. And as we all know, lists are a very quick theatrical film device that allows you to move things forward. And then I thought, well, why not make the whole film a list? Like as a structurally. So the letter is at the very beginning of the film, basically allows the audience to go, oh, there's going to be something next. There's going to be something next. There's going to be something next. And in those, what's going to be next, I, as a writer, could have reveals. And even though we were going into the past, I was able, using that device, to make these reveals, which keeps, one would hope, an audience engaged in what would have normally been a quite boring setup. Two characters just talking about breaking up is not dramatically interesting because it doesn't inherently allow for the conflict. But if they're having to go to address their past wishes, then that gives us the opportunity to have reveals and also to turn on audience expectations as well, to flip audience expectations.
Well done on that, because I thought that the characters were so well defined and beautifully created. And of
Thank
course,
you.
yeah, and of course, the main battle is finding the right actors. And Laurence Spellman and Laura Bayston are just so superb. How did you find them and work with them?
Well, Laurence I'd worked with before. Neither have done like leads in a feature. Neither have done leads. Laurence is what you would call a solid jobbing actor, and he would admit that. He's never been lead material, although he is an exceptionally good actor. And Laura had only come into acting in her 30s and had never been trained, not really, and had only done a few short films and a little bit of theatre and maybe the odd scene here or there. But I knew Laura from an improv Zoom group I set up during COVID. And as you've correctly witnessed, she's an extraordinary, given that she's never trained, given that she has no in-depth experience. She was, when I got to know her during the Zoom improv sessions I was hosting during COVID, I have an improv theatre background, and I set up an improv Zoom group where actors would come in and we would do these like scenarios on Zoom. So it wasn't like we were imagining we were flying an aeroplane like typical improv, or gardening, or or picking up the kids from school. The improv Zoom groups were done as Zooms. So we were improvising within a Zoom. And often it would be, we did a whole series called Couples in Crisis. And we used Zoom as the kind of the space. And Laura was I just only knew her from Twitter, and she joined the group. And every week I was astonished at how naturally good she was. And normally it would be a risk, wouldn't it, to hire someone like that for a feature film? But when you're micro budget and independent, you can take those risks. And also you should be taking those risks. So for me, it's a great source of satisfaction to give to people who've never had leads before the opportunity. And boy, are they big parts. They are a lot. They came to the first day of rehearsal completely off book. They knew their parts inside out. What you get with actors who are getting to do something that they dream of doing but never had the opportunity before is they'll give you extra. And in Laurence and Laura, they gave extra because for them it was a huge opportunity, and they were obviously a bit nervous, but they, as you've correctly pointed out, given that they have had such little exposure in lead parts, they were astonishing. And it was a joy to work with them both.
Yes, absolutely. They were excellent. And I also was interested in the way you reveal their backstories as the film progresses, including her Alcoholics Anonymous situation,
Yes.
and so on, which I found so interesting, the way you wrote that and the way she performed that.
Yes. I mean, the film is really an exploration of trauma. And you have at the very beginning, you're introduced to a couple in conflict. Then they have the letter and it gives them certain things they have to do. And really, what my exploration is in the story is, and it's just something I'm fascinated by. I'm fascinated by addiction and trauma and the link between trauma and addiction. It's like, and I am a big. There's a wonderful author called Gabor Mate, who has written extensively about the link between addiction and trauma, and even disease and trauma. That a lot of diseases are really unhealed traumas. So it's something that I've always been fascinated by, and I was really exploring that subject, and therefore the alcohol, the fact that she's an addict, but across all her life, in her sexual activity, in her desire to succeed and make money, and alcohol just happens to be one of them. And really, it's not about the addiction, but it's about the unhealed trauma. And in this case, it's a pretty traumatic situation that both this couple are dealing with.
Exactly. And again, so interesting. I'm intrigued about titles. The Wife and Her House Husband is the title of the film. It's always difficult to find the right title.
Well, a lot of people didn't like that for some reason, but I wanted it to be like a blank canvas. I didn't want it to be loaded. And I like the idea of it being just the blank canvas, and the wife and her house husband, I thought was like a little bit provocative in some way, in that the house husband was owned in a way, was a property of the wife, which was a deliberate kind of provocation, that because I wanted to obviously like sort of spin the sort of idea that it's often the woman that stays at home and is taking everything in the divorce, the house, the kids. I mean, the husband is. So I wanted to just flip those roles. And for me, it was quite interesting to explore what that meant for him, for example, in terms of what that meant in terms of their sexual dynamic. And that pops up in the film as well, because there's no balance in the relationship because of the trauma, because of the addiction. This is a couple out of balance, and I wanted to show in that sex scene that this out of kilter, unbalanced, and then towards the end of that scene, there seems to be almost, when he almost tries to win back the energy that he's kind of given up, there seems to be this rebalancing, but it's too soon, and he still wants to press ahead with the divorce. So these were the things that I was sort of exploring, and I felt that the title would, even though I know a couple of people have thought, oh, it's a strange title, but I like it because it's like a blank canvas in some ways.
Yep. Oh, again, I fully understand. And I like the way his anger at the start of the film, because I didn't quite know where it was going to go, started to ameliorate, and you get to know more about his character and looking after the children, and being a teacher and all that sort of thing. So, as you said, the balancing between the two characters and their relationship and what may or may not happen to them, I found so interesting.
Yeah, it it's that idea of balance was something that was very very prominent in my exploration, and in the rehearsals, it's something we talked a lot about. And in terms of the anger at the beginning, I know in like the marriage story, which is really, again, it's a breakup story. I don't know if you've seen it. It was a
Yes.
Netflix movie.
Yep.
I love that film. I really, really loved it. And I was lucky enough to see it in a cinema. And I had friends who'd seen it on the TV screen, and they didn't resonate with it as much, especially when the Sondheim song is sung. But I loved all of that. But what was interesting about that is the story builds up to about maybe the end of Act Two, when they have the big argument, and it's building through the first act, through and into the second, and it kind of, you see it climax to the big row in the flat that he's occupying. And I thought, well, I'm going to start there. I'm not going to build to that. I'm going to start at that point, and then let's start with the bomb, and then let's see what's happening as the dust starts to settle. So then energetically, it never goes like, it never ever goes back to that. We start with the anger and the explosion, and then it's an exploration of what happens after that, as opposed to building up to that moment. I thought, well, let's really cut in the middle of the bomb, as it were, and we'll never go back to there, because everything else is about resolving, rationalizing, exploring, dealing with, talking. Yeah.
And that again, that comes through so well in the film. I was very intrigued up until the end to see what the resolution would be, and of course, we won't do a spoiler for the audience. Um, you've already mentioned the handheld camera and so on. Chris Ferguson was the cinematographer, and I also want to mention the music. James Welland. You've really found some good people there.
Yeah, I think I've got a good track record of that. With my debut feature, Papadopoulos Sons, the DOP was James Friend, who went on to win the Oscar for All Quiet on the Western Front. So I've always got a good eye, I think, for good people. And I think the key, Peter, is is conversation. As a writer director, it's about you're collaborating. I think a good filmmaker, what a filmmaker is it's like a managing director of a company. You have to work with all the departments and give them permission to explore and be their very best. And with Chris, the conversation I had with Chris was, look, we can only shoot this handheld because that's the only way we can get this done quickly. So the challenge was, we need to find locations that can be shot 360. There's only so much we can do with lighting. So we have to have a general lighting set. And I said to him, you've got to act like a third character in the story. You've got to be able to improvise your moves in and out, find rhythm. And then we practiced a little bit with the actors. And I said to the actors, when you feel the lens come right up on you, work with it, allow for the silences, and treat Chris as a character in the story. And Chris was brilliant at that. And in terms of speed, we could just whip, because we rehearsed the actors like a piece of theatre. So they were able just to do this, and having that flexibility of a kind of general lighting set, a 360 production design, and the actors being able to work with Chris in a much more intimate way than you normally would with a camera team, allowed for a fluidity that I thought was perfect for the film. And James is just a really, really brilliant composer that understood the tone. And I think we were restricted just to 3 instruments, and we had a conversation about what those instruments would represent in terms of the characters, and kind of stripped down just 3 instruments for the whole score. But it's sometimes, as I've said, sometimes the restrictions are the thing that creates something more interesting.
It certainly is, and it certainly works well. And the film's release in the UK, you received a fair bit of acclaim for the film.
Well, yeah, I was fortunate enough that we got, when you're making low budget indie films, as this was, and it's a micro budget, and you've got no star names, it's almost impossible to have even this conversation that I'm having with you, Peter, because there isn't a desire on behalf of critics to watch those films. As you know, you're bombarded with hundreds of films and TV shows now. I think last year there was, like, before the writer's strike, I read there were 400 TV shows written in the year 2022, and that every one of those TV shows wants critics to review them. And then you've got hundreds and hundreds of films, and a lot of them have big movie stars. So for a film like this, just to even get the attention of some critics was a huge coup. And I think, The Guardian, to their credit, had known me before with my debut feature, and I was on their kind of radar. But Mark Commode, who's a very well, as you know, well-respected critic in the UK, he didn't absolutely have to review this for his show. But sometimes we rely, don't we? We just rely on critics to give the smaller independent films just a little lift sometimes, because without that, we all disappear. We just don't have a chance.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad that the film is screening in Australia as part of the British Film Festival, because it certainly is a really interesting film to be part of the festival as a counterpoint to some of the other films that are automatically going to get releases and will get acclaim. It's nice to see these self-distributed, low-budget films.
Yeah, and I think that's credit to Palace Cinemas, actually, and I think it's a real credit to them that they make those choices, not just with my film, but other films that were low budget and independent. And I think it's part of their culture as a group. And for me, it's been beyond my expectations to be included with obviously all those bigger movies with bigger star names and bigger budgets. So I'm incredibly grateful, and for me, it's an amazing opportunity to come to Australia and really kind of sort of explore Melbourne and hope next Sydney and some of and everyone's been really wonderfully friendly as well.
Yes. Well, it's great that you're in Australia to do some Q&As for your film screening nationally as part of Palace Cinema's British Film Festival. And I suppose that's so important to have filmmakers there to talk about their films and get audience reaction.
Yes, I think so. I think I'm because I'm an independent filmmaker, and I self-finance, I just self-distribute, I do kind of everything. It's not a problem for me to do interviews or engage with audiences. I think it's absolutely part of what an independent filmmaker should be doing. And I never understand why someone wouldn't jump at the chance to engage an audience, however small, right? Even if it's a small, intimate, small screening, I would be there to, if I'm free and available, I would do it all the time, because I think it's really important, because that's what the independent filmmaker has as an asset, that ability to do that.
Yes. Well, I hope you enjoy your stay in Australia, and I hope it all works out well with the screenings and Q&A. And I will ask you the question I always love asking. I know that you're a playwright as well as a screenwriter and film director and so on. Do you have any preferences in terms of how you write, and are you working on other projects?
Well, I always try and write a story that I feel is important, that is meaningful, and I'm working on a new feature film which is based on a short film I made called Two Strangers Who Meet Five Times, and it's nearly 3.5 million views on YouTube. It kind of went viral, and it's only 12 minutes, and I made it about 4 years ago. It's a wonderful message. It's a film about compassion and tolerance and forgiveness, and it's very much of its time, that short film. And anyone can find it on YouTube, just Two Strangers Who Meet Five Times. And I managed to create a feature film based on that, and I managed to attach a very well-known actress, female actor, in a supporting role, but it's enough to have attracted a producer and a casting director, and we're trying to attach more talent, and it's a bigger project, it's a bigger budget, and therefore it's something that I could only do in partnership with a producer whose only job is to produce films. But I can't say anything more than that, because we're still in that embryonic stage, and if obviously if I get that film made, and I've already spoken to Palace Cinemas, I'd love to bring it to Australia and re-engage Australian audiences again.
Well, Marcus, I hope that works out because you certainly have an excellent track record, certainly with The Wife and Her House Husband, which is now part of the British Film Festival Palace Cinemas nationally. And we've been speaking to the writer-director of The Wife and Her House Husband, Marcus Markou. Marcus, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for having me.
All the best. Enjoy Australia.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.